Hi, this is Editing Amanda from the future. I know you haven't listened to the podcast yet because I'm coming on before we even start the podcast. Our guest today, Michael, lives in Australia. He's in Queensland area. I have contacted him, which I know everyone wants to know or is going to ask. Is he safe from the cyclone? He is safe from the cyclone. He and his family have survived the floodings. Our hearts and our prayers go out to everyone affected in Australia with the cyclone and the historical floods that they're facing. If you can donate anything to the non-government organizations who are helping out, do so. If you can't, we understand. But Michael and his family are safe, and that is the important part.
Hello, this is Rita, and this is me and my mommy's podcast, and then my mommy, and there's me, and I'm just talking about this stuff, and there's me tap dancing because this is the Tap Dancing / Autism podcast, and there's a bunch of animals, and I'll be trying to in my hair, and there's a bunch of sand in the ocean. Also, there's all the soul talk stuff, I love all my mentors and babes. Oh, that, and also, yes, like life stuff and tap dancing. Oh, and also there my boots. My boots are amazing. Also, there's me, trying not to have a panic attack. Also, this is a podcast about me, autism, and tap dancing, and blah, blah, blah. I'm just ADHD in this thing. Also, there's my cute adorable puppies. Hello, and this is me, Leta, and that is my mommy, and this is a human being, and we are doing the podcast, and this is Leta's Tap Styles. Welcome back. If you've been here before, if you haven't been here before, we are talking about tap and autism and craziness, and then it's going to be a bunch of ADHD.
So today we have a special guest, Michael Coles from the Deep Dive podcast. Michael, I am absolutely terrible at introducing our guests. Do you mind telling our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so I'm a 50-year-old autistic that basically, firstly, I was diagnosed with a condition called PDD-NOS when I was 3 back in 1978. And then I was diagnosed with with Asperger's syndrome back in 2010. So that was obviously when I was 35. And then I got re-diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder back in 2017. I had a meltdown in November 2023 after quite a few changes at my workplace. So what actually happened is basically there was a couple of people that actually left, and then what occurred was basically sort of they changed all these sort of like my workplace sort of like the way I did my work and all that type of thing, which basically sort of like caused a lot of stress and stuff like that within my life, and then basically sort of I couldn't tolerate it anymore, and then basically sort of it caused a big meltdown. So yeah, so I had to be hospitalized with that because basically I basically like my wife texted me and basically sort of like notice are you okay and all that type of thing. And then what actually happened is I tried to sort of like play on, and then basically at 10 o'clock in the morning what actually happened is basically I sort of I rang the 13 health number, which was the health number in Queensland, and basically they called an ambulance. So they were quite concerned about my mental health at the time.
You were mentioning the changes at your workplace. A lot of our listeners are either new parents to the road of autism, or people who work in the entertainment industry but don't know what autism is. They don't completely understand why changes to the workplace would cause issues. Do you mind going into a little bit about that?
Well, it's basically I have a sort of like a system that basically works for me. So basically, I developed a system that basically worked for me, and also sort of like I like to ask a lot of questions in relation to sort of like with my autism. I basically sort of supply to sort of document how my autism affects me, how I like to work with my autism and stuff like that, and obviously sort of like with my condition, sometimes I have decision paralysis sometimes, so I need to sort of get sort of like some advice from others and stuff like that. Well, I had people that basically sort of worked with me and basically sort of knew exactly what I was, talking about and stuff like that, and they could understand me. But this new person decided to basically sort of like say, "Look, this is not good enough. You've got to make your own decisions and stuff like that." And it's just they sort of didn't understand my autism at the time, and the fact is basically is that they sort of, even though I sort of explained it in sort of my own words and stuff like that, they just still ignored me.
I think both of us can understand that. Can you understand that, Lita? She's giving me a look like, I'm not sure I'm talky today.
Okay.
She's kind of been she gets a little heated when talking about this because even at 13, she's had dance teachers who are like, I understand your autism, but I won't give you the accommodations you need because I don't understand why you need those accommodations.
Yeah, which is it just feels like, a lot of people just still don't understand the autistic condition and stuff like that, and they decided to sort of like, make their own decisions. And I just feel like, basically it's better to work in a collaborative type of way rather than sort of like, going with, the sort of like, the like, it's basically the my way or the highway approach. So it's sort of like, it's not really collaborative. It's not really sort of like integrating and stuff like that. What you can do, like a strengths-based approach and stuff like that. So because I know sort of a lot of people, a lot of us autistics, they can sort of do very well in one particular area. So I mean, sort of like for a fact is that basically sometimes people just don't understand me and stuff like that, and they sort of have their own sort of like ways and means of doing things. So it's, yeah, sometimes it just doesn't make sense and stuff like that. Basically we got our own way of working, we've got our own strengths, so why not embrace them?
That makes perfect sense. I know she's had dance teachers who were like, she's got an eye tracking issue. So she tracks right to left, bottom to top.
Yep.
And the way they teach a pirouette involves eye tracking. And they're like, for some reason, Lita will not do this properly. And I'm like, because her eyes don't work that way.
Hmm. Exactly, because it's sort of like, it's sort of it's just, we just, we actually sort of like, interpret the world a lot differently than what others do. So it's sort of, we're trying to sort of like close the gap in sort of one way or another, but sort of like, we're not trying to sort of, we're just trying to sort of help people to sort of like, interpret the world and be their authentic self rather than having to make them change and stuff like that to suit them, which I just feel it's wrong.
I think you hit the nail on the head right there with the authentic self. Because, Lita, you want to jump in and say anything? I will let you speak. I told her she couldn't use a lot of cuss words this episode. What would you like to say?
I don't know.
She's like, I don't know.
That's all right. I must have confused you to a degree. I do apologize.
That's okay. I think that's the authentic self. She's had a few dance teachers because we homeschool her because I was like, I'm not dealing with the dance world and school world and the private school world. I'm only able to deal with one of you crazy worlds.
Yeah, exactly. Because I know sort of like, a lot of people when they sort of like, they try and sort of like, we mentioned we're openly autistic and stuff like that. I know our daughter went to another sort of like school and stuff like that, which we had to change schools because they basically discriminated against us. She couldn't cope with the amount of students that were there. She basically got, they didn't put any accommodations and stuff like that, even though sort of like, we were paying sort of like a big amount of money and stuff like that for that particular school. But I mean, we're at another school now, which is basically sort of very accommodating, and I know sort of like, they were sort of trying to embrace her authentic self, and she's doing really well out of that. So, I mean, sometimes when you just feel that, some people are just not listening, or just, just not feeling, just not not sort of like it's sort of like, basically sort of saying, it's, you got to sort of do it our way. And just, I just feel like, it's better to sort of like, basically sort of like, it makes sense to sort of like, just, basically sort of like, have a bit of a balance and stuff like that. So we can sort of try and sort of, have a working solution.
It does. And I know we were talking earlier, Lita and I, that masking and being who they want you to be causes a lot of emotional strain. I don't think that these adults know it causes.
Yeah, and exactly. Well, I think there's sort of, well, I have to say a little bit ignorant of the fact because we're sort of like, I know in the States and stuff like that, a lot of applied behavioral, I don't know what it's ABA and stuff like that. I don't know what it's
Yeah.
caused by, but it's not very healthy, and it's basically sort of like teaching people not to be their authentic self. They're basically teaching them how to mask and how to like assimilate and stuff like that, which is it's not very healthy. I mean, sort of like it's sort of isn't it better to sort of like basically sort of like this is how I sort of like act in sort of like a regular basis. Like we'll have to sort of encourage people to sort of like do their own stimming and stuff like that. Why is there criticism about stimming and stuff like that? So you need to sort of like stim to be able to sort of like get your emotions out and stuff like that. I mean, this is how I am and stuff. This is how I am, and sometimes when I get nervous, if my speech is a little bit broken, by the way, I do have expressive language disorder and receptive language disorder as well, which I got diagnosed by a speech therapist early this year. So sometimes I don't make sense, or I make sort of like comments or I make sort of like start sentences like in the middle of a middle of a story rather than the beginning of a story. So sometimes it doesn't make sense, or it's a bit jumbled and all that type of thing. It tends to happen when I'm stressed though as well.
You look like
Well, if it helps, my mother never, ever, 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 never, ever, 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 ever makes sense.
I tend to start in the middle of stories too, so don't worry about it, Michael.
It's all good because it's sort of like this is the way we talk and stuff like that. And we can just relate, which is I think excellent. I think.
Oh yeah, Leta, did you want to talk about ABA for just a minute? Because I saw you getting
They're evil. I'm pretty sure they made an agreement with the devil.
Yes, I have to sort of agree with that because they're trying to sort of like, well, there's been sort of like, some in some areas of the world, they're trying to sort of like, put the ABA sort of system and stuff like that in place and stuff like that for autistics. It's not very healthy and stuff like that. So it's better to have the neuroaffirming way, and it's a more accepting way because I mean, sort of, it's more strengths based. It's also you're trying to sort of like you want to make sure that sort of like people can basically bring their authentic selves to the table. And I mean sort of like everybody is I know a lot of people are more accepting of people's authentic self. We just don't sort of tolerate that sort of like the thing that we're trying to sort of like get put on us and stuff like that, rather than sort of like we don't want to be silenced. We want to be sort of like who we are. We want to try and sort of like be authentic with who we are, and we just don't we don't take that sort of like crap.
yeah, she was in ABA therapy for 5 weeks, and it has scarred her for life.
Yeah, so that's why we're trying to sort of like, I'm part of the Australian Neurodivergent Parents Association, and we're trying to sort of like, get that thing or get those sort of like treatments away from people and stuff like that. So that's what we're trying to do here.
We have a problem in the US that the people who are pushing for it the hardest are actually parents of autistic kids.
Yeah,
And
which I feel is a shame.
It is. They're pretty much, you can take it if you want to real quick.
They should be ashamed of themselves. Especially since a good amount of those people support the puzzle people. They support.
I will need to explain that for people who don't understand. Autism Speaks wants to cure autism and wants to find the genes.
Yeah, and they're trying to cure autism, and yeah, no, I know a lot of people don't want autism to be cured. They want to basically sort of be themselves. So I think it's sort of like there's a rhetoric of sort of in some way around the world. I think sort of like there was a Daily Mail article, I think it was a couple of days ago, basically sort of saying there's this miracle drugs and stuff like that that can cure autism and stuff like that, or make people sort of verbal and stuff like that. Where it's sort of like, I mean, autism is a condition and stuff like that. It's a difference in being and stuff like that, and you just want to basically make sure that you can exist how you authentically are and not having to change basically yourself, and that what they're trying to do is basically change yourself. And I don't think that's right.
It is definitely not right. And Autism Speaks was very clear that there could be no one with autism on their board.
They are evil. They try to murder unborn baby. That's just evil. That's just evil. That's
You can-
crossing lines you
Calm
should
down.
not cross. That's evil.
Yeah, well, I have to sort of say something about this lived experience. I mean, lived experience is most vital for people on boards and stuff like that. If people, basically just, or the neurotypical, so to speak, just have sort of like, people with just themselves rather than sort of like, having the lived experience on their boards. Because, most commonly it's, the child is autistic, but it's most likely it's hereditary as well. So you could sort of say the parents are autistic. So, I mean, it's sort of like it can be hereditary and stuff like that because it's sort of like it's part of their DNA, so to speak. So, you've got, sometimes, if it's sort of like, it can sort of like, be in the parent and the child, but it most commonly gets diagnosed with the child first and then sort of like, with the parent. It does actually sort of like, be in the parent. So, you mean, it's like I've been living sort of like 50 years on this planet. I mean, basically just trying to sort of tell me to sort of not be myself and stuff like that, and sort of try and sort of like integrate within sort of like our society. But there's a lot more acceptance now compared to what there was even like 10, 15 years ago. I mean, there's a lot of people that sort of like, accept my daughter for who she is. They accept me for who I am. I found my neurokin, and that's also very important to me as well. I've joined a group called NeuroAccess, which is a group run by a person, a a neurodivergent advocate called Annie Crow, who is actually sort of like a human rights lawyer by trade. And she wants to basically try and sort of like, help people to be their authentic self, and they want to make sure they can sort of join with their basically sort of join with their neurokin. Because I know sort of like, they could share their issues with their neurokin. They could sort of like not be judged because of because of their autism and that type of thing. So I think it's very important to sort of, basically have that connection as well.
It definitely is. I think a lot of these parents on it's not just Autism Speaks. There's the parents of severely autistic kids and a bunch of other boards or nonprofit groups in the US. I don't think they got the support to be their authentic self and just be parents who love their kids.
Exactly. And sort of like, isn't it better to sort of like, the parents that love their kids and try and get the best out of get the best for them and stuff like that. So I think it's essential to get the best for them and stuff like that, because it's sort of like it's a more caring society, and sort of like the importance of connection, and also sort of like, basically feeling that they're supported, they're loved, they're sort of like, they're sort of appreciated for who they are. It's very, very important.
It definitely is. And we I know we here in the US have been finally starting to do some research into masking and into what all masking does to the human body.
Yeah, it does cause meltdowns and shutdowns, and also sort of in my case, it basically caused a meltdown, which I needed to go to hospital for, because I mean, like a lot of people, like they're trying to sort of like they're trying to sort of society is getting them to mask, and that's not fair on them, because they sort of need to sort of like be their authentic self. They want to bring their sort of authentic, their top selves to the table. But in the corporate world, especially, they're sort of like they sort of don't accept us for who we are. It's this is the way we work. I mean, sort of, I'm trying to sort of like do it in a nice sort of like gentle way, and I want to try and sort of like try and work with you rather than sort of like basically it's the us against them sort of rhetoric. And the us against them, it's not sort of really neurotherming, or but we're trying to sort of like try and sort of work with we like to try and work with people. It's better to sort of have the conversation open and sort of discuss this openly, and sort of like, bring this to the table. We need to discuss this more because, it's sort of like, I mean, sort of some people are affecting shutting us out, and that's not fair and stuff like that to, people and stuff like that. They want to bring their authentic selves to the table.
The only time I've gotten really annoyed is when the teachers are like, it's on her to tell us all about it. And I'm like, she's a child.
I'm not doing free labor. Pay me. I'm not doing free labor. Pay me. I'm paying you. Pay me.
I'm doing just a bit. And then it's like, I'm the adult. Come have a conversation with me and don't make the 8, 9, 10-year-old talk to you about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think sort of like the more the people can be sort of like themselves and who they are, the better it is. And I know sort of like, I went to a sort of like a convention yesterday where sort of like, there was a social enterprise where sort of like, a non-verbal autistic person, a normal with not, so NVLD is the condition, the formal condition that she had. But, basically she was like, bringing books to the table. She was selling her own sort of like squishies and all that type of thing. And those type of sort of like, businesses need to be celebrated and stuff like that because she's doing like she's putting 100% of her best and stuff like that to other people. And I think with us autistics and other neurodivergent people, we do appreciate that and we do celebrate that. And it's great to sort of like, connect us with connect other people with, connect autistic and neurodivergent people with other people. So I think it's sort of like with my podcast, the Deep Dive podcast, I basically have people who want to sort of like overshare and basically talk about one subject and they can talk about it to depth. So it's sort of like I've had some really sort of good success with it so far. I've had some really good feedback. And it's good to sort of like, get there sort of like, we like establishing ourselves a bit of a network, so to speak, where they can sort of like, they can talk to us. They could sort of like, they can communicate with other people. And they can sort of like promote their wares to other, basically neurodivergent people. So it's good in terms of like having that sort of like, they're people who actually have your back. And I think that's quite important.
It is. I don't know if you guys have your own way of talking down there. I noticed a lot of the neurodivergent groups up here in the US will say things like, when you're doing a deep dive and you're really into one thing, that's your trains.
Well, it's not just trains and stuff like that. They have all
It's
this sort
not
of like,
just trains.
yeah, if you meet one autistic person, you meet one autistic person. So they have their own sort of like interests or spins, that type of thing. And it's great to actually sort of like, celebrate those spins or special interests, so to speak.
Trains is
And
not
basically-
like, trains
like,
is not legitimately just trains. It's just the guy who started it, his interest was trains.
It's a
Yes,
joke.
but it's sort of, it's not just trains who are, I mean, like, you can have actually sort of like interest in trains. There's nothing wrong with that. But they have their own sort of like, special interests, but it varies from scope to scope. Sorry about that. I just had a bit of a frog in my throat.
No problem.
But it's sort of like, I mean, they're sort of like have their own special interests, which is quite unique. Like arts and crafts, for instance, they can sort of like, put together some like, that person at the convention was yesterday. They did their own sort of like, squishies, which has been really good. But they can kind of make their own businesses out of that, which I think is really, really good as well. Because I know sort of people, there's one person which I know that basically has an interest in sort of like the human body and how it operates and all that type of thing. So it's sort of like, it's interesting to sort of deep dive in that and not be judged with that. So that's what we're trying to do.
No, it was the reason we all call it trains, and it's not just trains for anyone who's listening from overseas. It is whatever your special interest is, because the guy whose mom was a neuroscientist who was like, oh, everyone has their unique thing they focus on. We just all started just calling it trains for some reason. It's like my nephew does world championship level Rubik's Cube competitions.
Okay, so it's like they do
Yeah.
sort of like, have their own sort of unique sort of passions and sort of like, it's it's their passion, and you shouldn't really sort of like downgrade their passion and stuff like that because your own agenda.
Yeah, we just like within the community, people will joke because I'll like be like, "Oh yeah, my nephew's going up over to Worlds," and they're like, "Oh yeah, his trains are Rubik's cubes, aren't they?"
Yeah. Well, the Rubik's cubes were really popular in the 80s and stuff like that, and they're still sort of popular now. So it's sort of like, it's interesting sort of the way that they do it. I'm not really sort of into Rubik's Cube as such. That's not my spin, but I'm more in sort of into radio and podcasts and stuff. But it's, it's more sort of the fact that sort of, basically you can sort of deep dive in your interest and we can explore that interest and stuff like that. So that's what's really, you can talk to those groups and they can sort of be really embracing of your interests, if that makes sense. I'm sorry if I'm not
That
making
makes
sense.
perfect sense. I just wanted to, because I know when we say trains, I've talked to a few of my Canadian friends who are like, "What are you guys talking about? You guys seem to have some weird language in the US." And it's like, yeah, we just came up with our own language so the neurotypicals can't understand us when we're all together.
Well, it's not their own language. We just communicate differently, and that's all it is.
That's, um,
And there's nothing wrong with that either.
there's nothing wrong with it. But I have noticed the more we're dealing with starting her dance studio that we've got going on, the more I'm using the terminology, and people are like, I don't understand what you're saying, but then I'll go talk to someone else in the autistic community and they pick it up right away.
Yeah. So it's it's sort of we just get it, and that's the biggest thing.
Oh yeah. Um Getting back to your podcast, cuz that sounds amazing to me. I am guessing you have had a lot of positive feedback from people having a safe space to just go off on their passion.
Yes, which has been really, really good. I've been sort of like a guest on other people's podcasts as well, trying to promote the podcast and also promoting my advocacy work as well, which I think has been really, really positive. Especially here, because I know sort of like, there's a lot of people backing us within the neurodiversity community or with the autism community. And I know sort of there's a lot of people who embrace the neuroaffirming type of way of not life, which I think sort of is brilliant. The way we're trying to sort of like, promote a movement where people can be accepted and people will be accepted and stuff like that in society, which I think is really, really important. I've been calling out for this sort of like, these services for like, you know, decades. And we're just starting to get the sort of the results now, which I think sort of like it's better to sort of like get the results and bring that passion into it rather than sort of like, basically sort of saying, oh, we're just trying to ignore it. We should be embracing who we are.
That I think is the biggest takeaway from a lot of this stuff is not only should we be embracing, but it would be helpful if some of the neurotypical community could start learning to embrace it too.
Well, I think we're trying to do that. I think we're trying to sort of, basically communicate to the neurotypical community that like basically work with us. We're trying to sort of like, trying to help you guys to understand us. And I think sort of like, it's better for me to sort of like, communicate with the neurotypical community because done that before. But, it's sort of better to sort of like, we need to try and sort of like, um, we need to try and communicate to them. This is like we can bring a lot of positives, and the positives can actually benefit the community rather than sort of like downgrade it. So it's better for me to sort of like well, we're not trying to sort of like, make sure we deal with it. We're trying to make sure that sort of other people can understand us and we can be part of this community as long as you can, basically understand this is the way we work. This is the way we operate and stuff like that. So it's better for them to understand how we work.
It definitely is. Because that I think she will disagree with me because she's a child and teenagers disagree with everything, right?
Yeah,
But
but it's all
um
good though.
a lot of the teachers who caused the most harm, they meant the most good. They really felt like they were doing something good, but they would later on go, "Well, I thought autism meant she had the brain of a 3-year-old."
That's not right, because I mean, sort of like it's a different way of thinking. We've got sort of like advocates here, like Chloe Hayden, for example, who's done really sort of big things in Heartbreak High, and the storylines are basically sort of like how she authentically feels with autism, what she feels, and stuff like that. So it's good to have her within our community and stuff like that to sort of like try and have that sort of like displayed and stuff like that so openly, and I think that's really needs to be embraced.
I think you're right. I think, and the more we can educate people, because the number of teachers who've also said things like, "Oh, well, it's just her being lazy." With her severe dyslexia, and I'm like, I don't think you know how dyslexia works.
Yeah, it's more a case that they just don't know. They don't know what they don't know. So it's better for them. It's better for us to sort of like gently sort of like bring them. Trying to sort of like convince them that sort of like it's not our way of the highway. We can sort of help you and stuff like that to understand us. I think that's really important.
She's just 13. She had to deal with them, and she's like, "No, I don't believe you that they were trying to do this from a place of good. I think they're just all horrible." But I'm just, yeah. Um, Masking, I think it all comes back to having to mask to be in society sometimes. Masking tends to, or at least the papers we've got coming out of the US, claims masking is tending to cause the breakdowns and cause all the stress that autistic people have been going through.
Yeah, and it's trying to sort of like, trying to make people be something who they're not. And it's not really sort of fair on them. I think it's better to sort of like, embrace who they authentically are, who they really are and stuff like that. So isn't it better to sort of like, just basically sort of embrace who you are and try and sort of like, this is who we are. You mean you can't change us. It's better to sort of not change us. We need to sort of like, educate others. This is how we sort of operate, and this is how we think. This is how we need to de-stress. We can't take stress very well, and I know sort of a lot of people in our society just assume that sort of like stress is a big part and stuff of that of the community, and we just have to sort of deal with it. We just can't deal with it, so we need to sort of like we need to sort of help educate people that sort of like we can't deal with these things. We need to sort of have accommodations to be able to sort of like to be able to sort of cope within our society. And I think it's also very important to sort of like know that we need to sort of like be who we are to be able to sort of like yeah, eventually, well, we're trying to sort of teach people that sort of masking is not right. And it's better to sort of like, just be who we are. We don't have to sort of like, do anything that sort of will eventually cause harm to a lot of us.
Um, she's being quiet because she's usually yelling at me, going, "Quit masking, mom. It's a new century."
Yeah, that makes sense. But mind
I,
you, we're sort of like, as people have been older, we're sort of like, we've been told to mask. We've been told to sort of like, hide who we are. Isn't it better to sort of like, just isn't it a refreshing sort of change that we don't have to sort of like mask anymore?
oh, it is. She's heard this story a few times. Um, but when I was younger, I was put into therapies to learn how to mask.
Yeah.
And one of the things that all my therapists were saying was you need to be exactly the friend that all these other kids want, not you be their who they want. I've run into them, 4 decades later, and they're like, "I don't know who you are. You're totally different." And I'm like, "This was the person I always was. You just didn't get to meet that person."
Yeah. And it's sort of, it's not fair to sort of like, just basically sort of like assume that, mm, how do I sort of like, describe it? It's not being who you authentically are, and it's better to sort of like in Inside Out there's sort of like there's sort of like the anxiety and all those type of things when we're sort of up to about the teenage years, we could sort of it's a lot more simpler and it's a lot less stressful, whereas sort of like in the high school years, basically people are taught how to mask and all that type of thing, and it's sort of like we can't cope with that type of thing, so it's better for other people to sort of like just basically sort of like this is how we act and stuff like that. There's nothing wrong with us. All it is it's basically sort of a different version of ourselves.
I love one of the things we've got going on at the dance studio is none of our teachers are going to ask a dancer to mask. They're all like, you will be your authentic self. And Lita's gotten annoyed at a few parents because the parents are so worried we're going to judge their kid for being, go ahead.
Like, seriously, if you're yelling in the back of the classroom, you're not the teacher. Well, we're having class. Well, the teacher's trying to do the teaching job. Well, you're probably confusing your child's brain because you're acting like you're the teacher. Well, also confusing me with your child, probably. I'm just saying it helps no one and it teaches your child nothing because you're acting like you're the teacher while the teacher's trying to teach it. It does not help your child.
Translation is we've had parents in the middle of class because we don't have a place for them to wait. They're trying to keep their kids from being their authentic self. And they're like,
yeah, that's not fair at all.
And it's because they've been judged so much in society. And they're like, wait, you're not going to judge me for my kid running around and clapping when they're excited?
Yeah, you need to sort of like, that's their way of stimming. They need to sort of like, get that sort of energy out of their sort of like, system. This is the way they cope. So, you can't sort of prevent people from, basically sort of like having to stim and, basically you need to sort of, they're excited. It's autistic joy and stuff like that. So it's, it's a way they express their autistic joy. So it's, you can't keep them from doing that.
But all these parents have been told by the other adults in their lives to keep their kids from doing that and go.
It's a child. Do they not know what a child is? It is a child. Every single child in the universe does that. It is a child.
Okay.
It is.
But I mean, it is kind of hard as a parent. Well, I didn't experience because I was more on the what do you expect? She's stimming, so get over yourselves to the adults. But I'd had decades of adults telling me what to do, and I was a little less likely to take it from them as an adult.
Anyway, yeah, I think sort of like I don't know what to say, to be honest. I'm sort of lost for words. I mean, sort of like, sometimes there's sort of like you sort of like, have that sort of those periods where you sort of you're lost for words. You don't know exactly what to say. So you sort of like, that's the word finding difficulty I've got. So you sort of, sort of like, you do have that loss of track of thought and all that type of thing. So I do apologize for that.
I have that on a regular basis. Do not worry about it.
Oh, good.
No, we have to train the parents just as much because a lot of these parents, they're new to the idea of autism. They haven't been in the community before and they're coming from all their friends are neurotypical and it's not that the parents or friends are jerks. They just don't know what autism is. So when their kid is running around clapping, the rest of us are like, they're excited. And the parents are like, oh no, they're making a scene.
Yeah, we're not making a scene. This is the way we communicate. So why judge us for that?
I know Lita has had some dance teachers because one of her stims is a complicated 3-point tap move that she just does because she's bored and you're talking to her. And the teachers have come out to me and gone, I can't seem to correct it. And I'm like, what part of subconscious did you not catch in that statement?
Yep. Can you just stop for a minute? I'm just going to change my camera if that's all right. Sorry about that. I can't change it while recording. Okay. Don't worry about it. It's all good. We can continue.
Okay. Did you want to say something, Lita? Because I saw you grab your microphone.
In my defense, if you're trying to teach me a move, just do the move and not just talk about the move. It's just boring as hell. Like, seriously, it's dance class. Nah, let's just talkie over and over and over and talkie and not do dancey. And just talkie. Like a barky little doggy.
She has an autoprocessory disorder. So understanding what you want her to do sometimes is difficult. She's in dance. They should be able to physically show her and they're trying to talk her through the new moves.
is very important. I know you're probably sort of interested. There's also a dance school which is very inclusive and stuff like that with autism and disabilities as well, called Tada and stuff like that here on the Gold Coast. So sort of we're trying to sort of like do a very similar thing and stuff like that, and we're sort of more embracing and stuff like that of people with disabilities. And I sort of like these sort of people can be appreciative of, basically who they are. They want to basically make sure they can sort of be exactly who they are, not having to sort of like, change people or, change themselves to sort of please others. And that's sort of not fair. There's also those support workers there. They'll be able to sort of help them to sort of like, perform at their best. So it's sort of like, great. It's great that sort of like, I know sort of like, you are doing like an inclusive dance school over in the States, but I know there's sort of inclusive dance schools here in Australia and stuff like that. And I know my daughter's involved with one of them. So congratulations on, basically sort of establishing those things over in the USA.
I'm excited to hear they're all over the world, because I know the other inclusive ones around here, they're not evil. A lot of it's done by people who don't understand. They don't
Yep.
know what they don't know. And there's the rules, like you have to be verbal in order to go into dance class. You have to be potty trained, which with autistic kids, that could be a while.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And they're sort of like they've got this slow developmental type of thing. So you can't force them to sort of do things faster just because the neurotypical community expects it. You just can't force it.
Oh no. And then on top of it, like Lita's got talent in tap dance. So she doesn't qualify for the autistic programs because she's not, you have to be. We've also had a bunch of our families have come up to us and gotten, and this is the other reason, Lita, they get concerned. They've been kicked out of autistic activities here around town because their kids have been too autistic.
And that's
That's
also the 2E sort of like, have you heard of the phrase twice exceptional?
Yeah, I have a lot of friends who do papers on twice exceptional.
Yeah, because I think sort of like the twice exceptional, I think people can be really, really exceptional in their one ability and stuff like that. For, Lita, for example, she's good at tap dancing and stuff like that. So it's better to sort of embrace that and stuff like that and be accepting of that. So I know people can do fantastic things if their strength can be sort of like embraced and encouraged rather than sort of like, brought back.
Well, one of our dancers who likes to turn around in circles when she's excited, it's almost a perfect pirouette when she gets excited.
so adorable.
Mm.
She's
Very good.
5,
I
everything
mean,
she
sort of
needs.
like, the twice exceptional, that's the twice exceptional type of means. I mean, people can be really good. I mean, sort of like some people can be really good at their job and stuff like that, but it's only sort of that one thing. And they sort of have deficits in the other thing to basically sort of, because they're sort of like, they do, how to sort of describe it? They basically sort of put all their energy and stuff like that into the one thing that they're really passionate about and really sort of excited about. But then sort of like, at the end of the day, they're very, very tired and they need to sort of like, their sort of brain needs to, basically needs to rest in order to sort of recoup for the next day.
That sounds so familiar. Like me, maybe.
Yeah.
No, but no, this one girl, she got kicked out of another dance studio because they're like, well, when she gets excited, she turns. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm sorry she's pirouetting for you at 5, but y'all
Like,
can.
it's a child, like even a neurotypical child would like probably turn for no reason. It is a child. It is a little child. Do these people not know what children are? Do they
Yes, I know.
forget they were a child
Yeah.
once?
And the fact is, it's sort of like, sometimes it's part of their childhood or something like that. It's part of who, basically they're a child and stuff like that. So sometimes they just, I mean, some people just expect that they have to sort of change who they are for them. And that's not right as well, because it's better to sort of like, embrace people for who they are. I know I'm repeating myself and stuff like that. And I do repeat myself when I'm a little bit stressed and a little bit nervous and I don't know what to exactly say. But it's the same message right through.
Yeah, no, I know. I really do think Lita's convinced that it's all for money, that they've realized that the autism community needs activities and they're just trying to make money off of them.
Yeah, and they sort of don't realize that sort of like, it's sort of like, they're just in it for, the wrong reasons. And that's not right. We need to sort of like, the lived experience advocates, they sort of know what exactly they want. And they want to basically sort of help you to sort of understand it and work with you. So isn't it better to sort of like, let them sort of like, be on those boards and stuff like that, contribute and stuff like that, because they can contribute so much to society in general.
And I do think a lot of these dance studios, they do have a heart, but they're seeing autism as broken. They're seeing it as, because I've had so many of her teachers who have gone, oh, she's broken, and we're just wanting to make sure she feels loved even though she's broken. And I'm like, I appreciate what you're saying.
But it's better to sort of like, fully embrace it and fully, basically sort of like, be who you are. Don't have to change for people. You just have to sort of like, just be who, like people are sort of saying, just be yourself. But, people are trying to sort of like change you to be their version of yourself. That isn't right.
I was reading an article this week in one of our dance magazines where they were talking about how inclusive dance is. I'm not sure if I said that sarcastic enough, but it was meant to be sarcastic. And one of the autistic dancers they interviewed was like, well, when I was little, I needed them to explain why this step had to be done this way, what all the mechanics were about. And she's like, once I realized that I was not supposed to ask questions, even though the teacher said to ask any questions I had, life
Mm.
was better and I was better at the school. And I'm like, that's not inclusive, honey.
Yeah, it's sort of like, their sort of version of inclusive may need to be checked.
Yeah, and the article was just like, look at how inclusive these studios are now. We're training autistic dancers to, function in our typical classes. And I'm like,
But is it sort of like their version of, being inclusive versus our version of being truly
it is
inclusive?
definitely.
It's definitely different. And we need to sort of like, show them that, basically the benefits of being truly inclusive.
I know Lita had a dance teacher who's like, we are really inclusive. I let her sit on the side of the dance class while we're doing dance.
But that's sort of, isn't that exclusion?
She, to this day, will swear up and down, and she truly believes she was being inclusive.
That's sort of really sort of like, that really gets my goat sometimes, because they sort of like, say like this is being inclusive, but it's not being inclusive. You're trying to exclude them and stuff like that to be, yeah, it just baffles me.
Oh yeah, and they have. You want to say something?
Is
Real
that
quick?
the same person who locked me in the office a few times?
No, it was a different one.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Gosh.
They sort of like, hopefully this still isn't occurring, because it's cruelty. If they sort of lock people, basically just to be on their own, it's cruelty.
That's still being allowed here in the U.S. Thanks to ABA and all that, because that's
Yeah, so
considered.
that's why we're trying to sort of like, promote
Yeah,
the neuro-inclusive, neuro-affirming sort of way of things. And I think it's more sort of accepting, and it sort of like brings their strengths to the table, which I think sort of like, which we actually sort of need in the entire world, rather than sort of like, trying to basically sort of say it's my way, the highway, and they're trying to sort of like, basically shut us out. And that's not fair.
yeah. No, we've had a couple people who are like, but you aren't inclusive at your studio, and I'm like, yeah, I know we're not inclusive. I know we only do autism, but that's because there has to be a safe space for all these dancers.
Yeah. And it's also sort of like, they're trying to sort of like, it's basically a safe space where they basically sort of like, they can be who they are. They don't have to mask. They can basically sort of bring their authentic self to the table. And that's what sort of like, our sort of like, we've got a few sort of groups around here which are truly neuro inclusive. And I sort of use the word neuro-inclusive because they're basically sort of like, we just don't just accept autism, we accept ADHD and all the neuro sort of divergent sort of like, aspects and stuff like that. They can bring them all to the table and stuff like that. And we could just help them to sort of like, bring their sort of like, help them through their will basically help them and stuff like that to a degree, because if they sort of have issues and stuff like that, I mean, most of the time it's from the neurotypical world, but it's a safe space for them to be who they are, and they don't have to sort of like, we sort of like, we could see what, basically sort of what issues they're experiencing and stuff like that. So we want to sort of make sure it's a safe space for them to sort of, basically express that and not be judged.
We will accept like ADHD and all those in students. What I'm not going to accept, because I am not going to be inclusive, but it's because of that safe space. If you are neurotypical and you can work at the neurotypical studios, they're just down the street. We have 46 of them here in town.
Hmm. Yeah, but it's best to sort of like, have that sort of safe space for them to sort of like, be exactly who they are, and it's critical for that.
Yeah.
So it's better to sort of have those sort of like, those sort of like, safe spaces for them to truly demask, truly sort of like, yeah, it's basically sort of like, it's their area and stuff like that. They can truly be themselves, and that's critical.
And for our kids, the number of their therapists who've called us up going, "What are you guys doing over there?" And I'm like, "Why?" And they're like, "'Cause these kids are thriving now." And I'm like,
And
we're just
thriving is the big thing, because basically if they can truly be who they are, they can sort of like really sort of thrive, and they sort of it's a big relief to them, because like, a lot of people, like, if they're sort of like, had that sort of like, ABA therapy, it's a relief to them that basically sort of like, it's sort of like it's a weight off your shoulders. It's better for, they can sort of like truly thrive. They can truly be who they are. And it's sort of like, it feels like it's a big relief, like you're being listened to.
and the moment you have that, you can actually thrive as a human being.
Yes, exactly. And I think that needs to be embraced.
Oh yeah. I know I told you we were only going to go an hour. We're pushing an hour right now. We would love to have you back on the podcast at some point in time, Michael, because this conversation has been amazing.
I know. I hope I haven't been sort of like, I haven't sort of like, it's sort of like more an info dump for me. So, yeah, definitely. I would love to be back.
Yeah, no, and hopefully we did not stress you out too much and didn't scare you off.
It's all good. It's all good. I've been on podcasts longer than an hour, so it's all good. So, yeah, so I'm happy to sort of like, basically sort of talk about it for in like a big period of time. So it's sort of one of my passions of mine.
Understandable. I probably need to feed her because it's pushing up dinner time over here.
All right. Well,
But
I'll let you guys
thank
go
you
on, and
so
I'm
much.
looking forward to be
Can
back on
I,
the podcast at some stage.
before you go, can you tell people where to find you on the internet?
Okay, so it's www.deepdiveau.net is my the address for the podcast, the Neuro Access Network, and there's a offer and stuff like that for people who can join the Neuro Access Network at the moment, www.neuroaccess.com.au/the network, and there's sort of like some great meetups, and also some good sort of like there's also there's some meetups. There's also sort of like a message board. There's some resources and stuff like that there. So yeah, so that's probably the two biggest ones that I like people to go to. So and basically embrace our your autism and neurodivergence.
We will make sure that those links are in the description below. And as always, we've got a list of our long amount of guests now on the website. And so you can always go to our website to find all of Michael's information. Thank you
All right.
so much for coming on.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much.
All right. You want to say bye, Leta? She's waving bye.
So, thank you for watching the podcast, and please subscribe, and also look at the adorable paper. So if you want to subscribe for it, and also please leave a like. And don't forget, if you subscribe to our stuff, you won't miss any of our new podcast stuffies. And also, did you see the adorable paper? Don't you like it?